realized that I was exhausted, I was burned out, and I was living in a culture that was saying that wellness and success was attainable, but it always felt out of reach. There was a point where I defined wellness as working as hard as I possibly could, producing as much as I possibly could. I think I compromised my physical and mental well-being in a lot of ways to kind of achieve this American dream, to keep climbing this corporate ladder, not realizing that it was a slide to my own demise in a lot of ways. Time is money. And I was like, why did that pop into your head? And instead of judging and saying, because it is this, or why did you think that? Go, wow, okay, where did I first hear that? It's not your fault, and there are incredible people around you that believe in better things. And so if you start to question those beliefs and then have conversations with people around you that might question the same ones, that might in small ways bring us to a better future.
Dani, it's great to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. Thank you. It's great to be here.
It's great to have you. So today we're talking to Dani Bicknell. She's the author of The Restorative Rebel, and we'll be talking a little bit about the book, a little bit about you. And Dani and I know each other, so it might be a little bit more of a casual conversation, so that'll be fun. But before we get started, I'd like to ask you the question I ask all my guests, and that is if you have one well-being boosting strategy that's your favorite, what would it be and why?
Take a walk and breathe. And actually, if I can throw one more thing in there, drink some water. I would say anytime I'm in a moment of cloudiness or frustration or something just doesn't make sense, I try and, especially since a lot of my work is at a computer, I just step away, take a little walk, focus on my breath, drink some water, and then reassess. And not all problems get solved with those three things, but a lot of them do. And it tends to bring like clarity and just calmness. And so, yeah, I do that as many times a day as I can. But especially in moments where I just need a little bit of a reframe, is I take a walk, focus on my breath, and then drink some water.
I like that 3-point approach. And it's been interesting talking to different guests. Most of them focus on nature or breathing. It's so
Mm.
funny. I expected people to say all kinds of different things, but I guess these are the simplest to use, most effective strategies. So that's pretty cool.
They're free, they're available no matter where we are. And I find that wellness is really in the eye of the beholder, even though a lot of culture and society makes it seem a bit unattainable. I always bring it back to the breath, a simple walk, some movement. And water is literally the key to life. So if I'm cranky, tired, anything, drinking a little bit of water, getting some hydration, I'm like, okay, I think we can soldier on.
Well, thanks for sharing your tip. And I'd like to get to know a little bit more about you. I know a little bit about you, but I don't actually know
Yeah.
all that much about your story and how you came to this point of writing this book and getting interested in well being in a more societal sense.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a long journey and you have been a part of it. And so thank you. I've like given a lot of credit to just the resources from the Berkeley Wellbeing Institute in general. But I would say that I am a recovering workaholic that was raised to really believe that if I worked hard enough, I could get whatever I wanted. And so I have had a very diverse career, but it was really based on this internalized idea that my value was really based on my work, how much money I was making, how much I was producing. And even though I felt very drawn to professions like education, community building roles, I found myself kind of feeling forced into these hyper aggressive competitive fields, which I initially really was attracted to that energy. And then I realized that I was exhausted, I was burned out, and I was living in a culture that was saying that wellness and success was attainable, but it always felt out of reach. And so even when working with super high net worth, powerful individuals, I saw this idea of wellness to be something that was only earned, could always be put off, was seen as a luxury, was not seen as a part of life. And I went to some pretty extreme lengths. I think I compromised my physical and mental well-being in a lot of ways to kind of achieve this American dream, to keep climbing this corporate ladder, not realizing that it was a slide to my own demise in a lot of ways. I sacrificed a lot of relationships, my own well-being, which was very hard to define. And so after working for over a decade in nonprofits, international development, and tech, I really started to look at this idea of internalized capitalism. And the idea is that your wealth, your value is really tied to this individual achievement, to this competition. But I also saw that nature, for one, and humans, we need to be collective. As a species, we're raised to be collective, to use our tools and our brains to come together to survive and thrive. And yet we are growing up in this culture that was really idolizing individual achievement and success and competition, and forcing us to work against each other instead of working towards each other. And frankly, I just grew tired of that. And I think the pivotal moment was the pandemic, where I was working with entrepreneurs and trying to help them build digital products in health tech and education and financial technology. And I realized that business as usual, this culture that I had really internalized, was not working anymore. And it was actually making us all physically sick. So I took about 3 years to look at the work that I had done, look at a lot of the research that I had done, started to do a listening tour around what different frameworks were for wellness, how different people were defining wellness. And it ultimately culminated in this book. But what it was for me is it was a cathartic experience to realize that I had really been following this path that felt out of sync. It felt very inauthentic. And I wasn't alone. I was working with other people that were burning out, that were exhausted, that were having mental and physical health issues, and their work culture, their personal, individual, internalized culture was not serving them. It was just making them sicker. So I thought, why not pause, um, look at what's happening, try and critique it so that we can question what's working and question what's not working. And let's also look at ways to make it better. And so I've worked with many different individuals, organizations, universities, to see like what is wellness, how do we define it, and how can we work towards a culture that promotes it as integral and essential, and not as a commodity or a luxury that's only available to a small few.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious. So, I've read a chunk of your book, and so I know ish what you mean by internalized capitalism, but I'm really curious. Like, you say it kind of defines your value in a way that made you burn out, doesn't feel good for well being. So, can you dive into that a little bit more so people can evaluate themselves to determine whether they've internalized capitalism in a way that makes them not feel good?
Yeah, I mean, it over the course of writing the book, it became both easy and hard to define, because in some ways I had always been raised in this American culture, but around a lot of different cultures that had come to the United States, just as we all have, in many ways, and realized that. I was raised with this idea that through individual achievement, through success, through always producing, that I would get stability, I would get accolades, I would get financial success, I would get also these personal things around wellness, like family and community and leisure time. And I grew up, as a millennial with some, I think, huge questions asked about that system. Is it attainable to have all of those things with this current system? And the story, and some might say it's propaganda, some might say it's PR, some might say it's our cultural identity, was no, it's still achievable. You just have to work hard enough. And yet I saw everyone burning out around me. And I had these beautiful examples of people from other countries and other cultures and other religions and other perspectives, spiritualities saying, oh, no, it doesn't have to be like this. This is just one way of being. But I felt a bit indoctrinated by it through pop culture, in some ways through school. Definitely when I entered university and the working world, it was this idea that I couldn't come up as as a community. I couldn't collaborate. I needed to individually negotiate. I needed to work hard myself. I needed to take as much credit as possible in order to get to this place. And so when you internalize this idea that you are the only one that can make a change, and everything is your fault, that puts a lot of pressure on yourself to be both a conscious consumer and climbing this corporate ladder and having this responsibility to take care of both your family, your education. We also have to think about the future, retirement. Then we have to think about all these other externalities that we are told will get us this happiness. And I just saw it bringing stress to everyone. And most importantly, I saw it bringing stress to myself. I was working at this rate, and I had student debt, and I had these promises if I were to take on more debt, like a mortgage or a car loan or these other things, that I would be happy if I just worked that much harder at my job, if I just persevered that much more. And it just felt like a path to nowhere. And so I thought, what if I question this idea that everything is urgent? What if I question the idea that rest needs to be earned? What if I question the idea that my worth is solely tied to my productivity and my financial success? And I found freedom. I found a bit of reprieve. And selfishly, it took the pressure off. And I felt much more empowered to start to question the system that was allowing me to burn out, the system that was not providing me with these what I think are human rights, like education and healthcare, and kind of holding them on this pedestal that I needed to earn, take on debt for. And I said, oh, there's so much less pressure if we just start looking at this culture and at this system than putting all this pressure on myself to just be better. And so through that, I kind of started to question, what am I internalizing? And it was these cultural aspects of capitalism, which is both, I think, a culture, it's an economic system, and it's something in the middle that the government, I think, has contorted. And so in my book, I mentioned that there are many different ways to look at the lens of capitalism as an economic system. But what I was really trying to break down is, how does it show up in us as individuals in terms of how we value ourselves? How does it show up in the workplace in terms of how we work together or against each other? And then how does it show up in society, whether that's through pop culture, policy, or just the way that we interact with each other? And I find that when we're going through this boom in AI, and also a loneliness crisis, I was starting to question why we just accept certain parts of innovation while we're ignoring these really fundamental things like coming together, resting, creating art, stuff that some people might cringe at and be like, oh, I'll do that later. And the reason I say that is I was one of those people. So this was a bit of a definition that I started to create for myself. And then I started asking questions in the book so that others could maybe create their own definition of how have they internalized these beliefs that they've grown up with. And you don't have to be uniquely American, but I do call out very clearly that America is the petri dish of capitalism. Things are growing and changing, and it might not look the way we want it to, but it's definitely being upheld as the thing to do, the thing to be, the land of opportunity.
Yeah, and I think what you're talking about here is like the beliefs that we're taught when we're so young, we don't even realize that they're beliefs. Slash, they're so interconnected with everything we experience in our culture here in America that we don't realize we can actually choose to believe something different, choose to value something different. And so that's
Mhm.
what I really love about your approach, is because you're questioning beliefs that are so deeply held that we might not even realize we have them. In fact, most of us don't realize we have them. And it's not necessarily that you have to believe capitalism is good or bad. It's really, like you said, about questioning. I have this belief that I am only valuable if I make X dollars per year, let's say. Is that a belief that improves your well-being? Um, Generally not, not even if you're making a lot of money. So
Mhm.
capitalism affects the beliefs that affect our well-being. And so just that's kind of my summary of what you just said.
Absolutely. And I think the question about what is wellness is deeply challenged by a culture of capitalism because and I asked this in my book with a few other kind of prodding questions of how do you define wellness? There was a point where I defined wellness as working as hard as I possibly could, producing as much as I possibly could, and making as much money as I could. That was wellness for me. That was doing really well. And now I define it as time is luxury, rest is essential, wellness is also essential when I put it in that framework. But for some, and I've realized this through, working with many different organizations that look at wellness through different lenses, that it's highly personal. But if we don't feel safe to talk about how we define wellness, especially in a culture that defines it in a very narrow way, we're not actually going to res- we can't be the change unless we see it around us. And if we can't talk about it and we don't feel safe about it, then we're going to start to define it or distort our own definition. And so it took me a while to say, oh, the only reason I think of wellness as something that needs to be earned, that's something that's a luxury, that's something I only deserve after I've burned out from working X amount of hours or doing a huge project, then that's not sustainable. And when we look at simple things, like even in nature, when you're forcing a plant to grow in the off season, it's not going to grow as well. And we know that we can inject it with chemicals and other things, and sun rooms to like try and force it to do what we want it to do. Just as humans, we can force ourselves to work as robots, but eventually our body will break down. And there's plenty of research to show all of these, stress related diseases that are caused by heightened cortisol levels, heightened stress. And the answer has always been to rest and recharge, but our work culture has never allowed us to really do that. And so I find that at the very least, really examining how you define wellness and then looking at how you might be able to honor how you define wellness with where you work, how you live, that is a very tough question and can't be answered simply because for me, what I realized is I wasn't honoring my own definition, and I wasn't working in places that would honor it or would support it. And so I pushed myself to change my definition, and now I've pushed myself to reclaim it, which also comes with pros and cons. But it is a
For sure.
journey.
Yeah, for sure. And most people don't know this about me, but I actually burned out also, and then got super, super sick to the point where I could only work like a few hours a day. And so it forced me to be like, everything that's non essential removed. And then as I was working my way back towards health, I was like, all right, well, what do I need to do in order to be able to create a business and a life that continues to sustain my well being instead of putting me back in burnout? And the Berkeley Wellbeing Institute was formed. So I am so grateful in the long run for all that. And it seems like
Yeah.
you're continuing on your path, and hopefully that's going well as for you as well.
Yeah, no, that's such a beautiful story. And, now we have this vocabulary around calling out burnout. And I haven't met one person that hasn't had an experience like that, whether they define it or not. It's wonderful that the Berkeley Wellbeing Institute came out of that and acknowledging it. I have met people where they've seen it as a failure. And that's where these deeply ingrained beliefs come in. As I've said, no, this is a wake up call for you to do something different. But if you don't answer that call and go against the grain, start to work another muscle that's really building up your wellness, then you're doomed to repeat the same mistakes. And I think different generations have always dealt with trauma and stress in different ways. I have an older relative that said, it's so interesting that your generation is so anxious. We weren't anxious when we were younger. And my response was, I don't think you had the vocabulary to call out that it was anxiety. You called it out as something else, and you had different mechanisms for using that. And one mechanism that I think is very helpful is just naming that feeling not as a personal failure, as something that's happening to us all. So burnout is something that's happening to us all. Why not question it? Why not build paths? Because it's no longer an anomaly, it's a pattern, and it might be an epidemic in some ways. And so by hearing your story of creating a different path and starting to hear other people's stories, it was really inspiring for me that exists. And I wanted to get that message out to people that might be in my situation, that were suffering from this shame, this guilt of just not doing enough, and say, oh no, there are other paths, but it will take a while. It's not going to be easy. And, wellness isn't built in a day.
Yeah, totally. So you're talking about shame and guilt and strategies, basically. So what are some of the strategies or tools or self reflections that people can do to start to dig themselves out of this mindset?
Yes, I think that that is something that was very important for my own journey, and it's one that I mention in the book several times because I deal with a few different themes. And how internalized capitalism kind of interprets those themes, anything from social impact to how we value money, work, leadership. But I look at it through an individual lens, a business lens, and a societal lens. So some of the questions that I started to ask myself were really reflective in the way that I wasn't going to answer them one time. I was going to answer them many different times. And so one was, what is time for me? And at first it was very easy. The first word that popped in my head was time is money. And I was like, wait, why do I think that? The second part of any question that I asked throughout the book is, why did that pop into your head? And instead of judging and saying, because it is this, or why did you think that? Go, wow, okay, where did I first hear that? Maybe I heard it from a TV show, maybe I heard it from a teacher, a mentor, a family member, but that one question just started kind of popping up. And I ask a few other simple questions, like, how do you define wellness? What is success for you? Not what are other people's versions of success? What is success you admire in others? But what is success for me? And even though I was chasing this kind of stereotypical path to success. Went to get my undergrad, took on debt because that's what you do. It's going to like lead you on this path. Then got my graduate degree, then wanted to get these jobs that had these good names to go down this path. I was like, success for me is actually quality time with family and friends and doing things that I love that are creative, like making art, like writing, like cooking. And I realized I wasn't doing any of those things. And so I was like, oh, so if this is how I'm defining success, and yet I'm not doing any of those things, what is out of balance? And once again, the big work was, instead of saying, oh, that's your fault, why aren't you doing that, I was like, what external forces are preventing me from doing that? And I feel like the way that I've defined internalized capitalism is the second that you take pressure off yourself, the second you forgive yourself, you give yourself compassion, it's your fault, whatever negative thing comes your way. And so that anxiety and that fear that I always had to be in control of everything felt very suffocating. And once I started looking at these external factors, I was like, oh, it's because this system and this culture is not built in this way at all. And it actually creates scarcity where there is a ton of abundance. And once I really started to force myself to answer this question in other ways, not from a reprimanding manner, but from a curiosity manner of, why am I thinking this? Who's telling me this? I started to realize, okay, well, if I'm the boss of my own life, then I need to walk the walk as I'm trying to reframe this talk that is really self-talk. And so that became a very powerful tool. And so these strategies are very simple questions, but the hard work is asking yourself that question over and over again. And instead of critiquing your own answer, just trying to lengthen that reflection time by saying, why do I think that? Who told me that? Do I really believe that? And then have fun with that reflection time of like, where's the first time I heard that? Why did that influence me? Why was I inspired by that? And each layer, I think, starts to get down to a more clear definition for yourself. And there's no judgment around what that is. It's just, I think the purpose of the book is to say that maybe this definition that is carrying you along life is not the one that feels authentic to yourself. So let's peel back those layers to just get to something that feels authentic to yourself. And then you're going to feel, I think, less burnout, more clarity, more balance than following this path blindly and then being upset that it's not bringing you the happiness, the success, the fulfillment that you think it would.
Yeah, and this questioning of beliefs, whether it be related to internalized capitalism or internalized anything, really is like the key to improving your well-being. It doesn't always look that way, but like even simple strategies like gratitude or self-compassion is you questioning the way you're viewing the world. And the more you can get in the habit of that questioning, the deeper you can dig and the more like filters that prevent you from experiencing the good in the world fall away. So that's another reason why I just love your approach, because you're kind of teaching people this key skill that can be applied to not only the topic that you cover, but every belief we have. And
Mm-hmm.
like you said,
Mm-hmm.
you peel them away, you get more clear, you feel more authentic, and it just keeps getting better and better from there, with ups and downs, of course.
Of course. And actually, that's where your work, I think, has been really inspiring, because for somebody like myself, I was so set in my ways that even seeing that there were other perspectives, other ways of looking at well-being, other mindsets, was game changing. Because
Oh,
once
so
you
glad.
know that there's not just one way of doing things, there's a whole spectrum, a whole set of colors, a whole like all these different ways of looking at your own worldview, of how you value yourself, whether it's cultural, spiritual, just knowing that there is a cornucopia of options, I think is so much more empowering than I think it can be simple to just have one perspective. But for me, it wasn't it was very limiting. And so what I think your work has done has really shown that you're not alone in this way of thinking. And there are a bunch of different ways to think about it. And here are all of the different frameworks, theories, and resources, especially, that can just help you start to not, I always say trick your mind, because for me, I had to trick myself in order to start believing it, and then it became easier. So maybe they're tips, but for me, it was a little psychological trick that I had to play in order to kind of slowly open those gates to seeing other perspectives, and then really starting to work towards understanding and embodying the ones that felt more aligned and authentic.
Yeah, that's very kind of you to say. I do really appreciate that.
I speak
So,
the truth.
and so, as you know, through your own journey, there are challenges along the way. Can you share a little bit about some of the challenges you've moved through, or maybe some of the ones you're still moving through, just so people have a sense for what this process might look like in real time?
Oh, yeah. Um, I think the hardest challenge that I've had to deal with is that it's not something that's just going to get checked off your list. So, I am the type of person that gets um, like a high from creating a to-do list and checking everything off and then feeling so satisfied. But, just like any adrenaline or dopamine rush that you get, it can be short-lived. And so I thought, okay, well, if I just do all these things to achieve my wellness, then wellness will be sustainable forever. And then it'll be one and done. I take this one course, I read this one book, I do this one thing. And the challenge, but I really think it's an opportunity, is knowing that it's a muscle, and that muscle will atrophy if you are not consistently working it. And it will treat you very well, and it will protect you, it will give you balance. But it is not going to work if you just do it one time. And
And the
so,
opposite is also true. The more you build the muscle, the more automatic it becomes. Like, I remember when I
exactly.
first started learning emotion regulation, my emotions were a mess. And years later, I'm like, all that stuff just happens on its own now. So
Yes.
it's pretty nice.
It becomes easier, like just tapping into the idea of emotional intelligence. For me, it felt very obvious and also very hidden. And so when you talk about emotional regulation, I was like, okay, I did it this one time. And it doesn't work like that. But what I realized is, when I can catch myself in a moment of, I'm going to say, a moment of grace, where maybe I'm not emotionally regulating, or I'm feeling that anxiety come up. I can't control the past. So what happened would happen if I have my little outburst. But then I try and look at it as, why did I feel that way, and what can I do differently next time? And how did it, like, did the outburst, did the anxiety, did it achieve its goal? And the answer is always no. In terms of, did
Always
it
no.
did
It's
it
very
make
strange.
did it make me meet that deadline any better? Was I more present with people? Did I produce better work? Was I more on time? Probably not. It's usually, did I bring a little more chaos to the situation? Did I get a little adrenaline rush? Did I put pressure on myself or others? Yes. And so the challenge is constantly working that muscle, but also not working it to overexertion. So growing up in the Bay Area, I found that it was a really interesting place, that both had tech innovation and this idea that you can constantly evolve, and also wellness innovation. But both of them felt like you had to really commit and almost burn out. And so when I was trying to discover what wellness was, it was being packaged as something I needed to meditate 5 hours a day. I needed to cut out every single type of food from my diet. I needed to sleep 12 hours. I needed to drink 5 gallons of water. It just felt very unattainable. So I have broken down my definition of wellness into bite-sized strategies so that it feels consistent, it feels less effort in the long run, by meditating maybe 1 minute a day if I can, trying not to drink too much caffeine, or trying to limit the amount of harm I'm doing, knowing that I still need to live in this capitalist world. So it's always a dance. But if we're putting way too much pressure on ourselves to swing in this opposite direction, that might work for some, but I don't think that works for many. And so actually, to build on this idea of internalized capitalism, it's also not this idea that you're going to go into the forest and become a monk and just like not participate in society. It's just the idea that you can create your own restorative rebellion by creating a tiny little acts of resistance. And when I say resistance, it's resistance towards shame, resistance against this hustle culture, resistance against this burnout by taking care of yourself in little small ways. And then, as we mentioned with the muscle, over time, it will feel effortless, but it won't be built in a day. And if you're overexerting yourself, just like any muscle that you overexert, you might strain it.
I love that. That makes complete sense. So we're talking a little bit about, we've been talking about a lot of different strategies. So if someone's watching this and they're like, like, is this for me? How could they figure that out? Who is this for? Who's your book for? Who are these ideas for?
Wow, that's a good question. And it's one that I asked myself a lot during the writing process. And ultimately, the answer was this book is for me, in terms of I was a working professional, very optimistic, very gung ho, and still felt that I was never good enough. And I was working with people that really defined this idea of success in these ultra capitalistic ways, or even wellness in these ultra capitalistic ways. And they still didn't seem happy or fulfilled. And so I wrote this to a younger version of myself to say, you are not alone in questioning these systems. And even though you succumbed to them for a long time, you saw the warning flags and you're starting to rebel against them in a restorative way, in a way that is trying to let other people know that they're not alone. And so the groups of people that I interviewed, that I worked with, that really fell into this were mostly women and people of color that were in leadership roles, that felt like they had been discriminated from a system, but also forced to play in it in a certain way. They were caretakers and parents that were trying to raise their children as if they didn't work, and then work as if they didn't have children, while not acknowledging the tremendous value that these caretakers bring to raising this next generation. And yet, from a capitalistic perspective, make very little money and usually rely on subsidies and charity, which didn't feel in accordance with how I saw like success and value of work. And then it's also, I think, for young professionals, this was in some ways a love letter to myself when I was just starting to enter the working world, to basically say, don't put so much pressure on yourself. You're going to do a great job, but you don't need to burn out. You don't need to push yourself to like your physical limits. You don't need to cut off relationships or be ultra competitive in order to achieve this thing that's ultimately not going to make you happy. And I bring it back to the core root of what made me happy was friends, family, quality time, building movements, initiatives, projects with people and collaborating with them, and then working with leaders that I saw doing the same. I noticed that the media doesn't like to portray these types of leaders, and we usually, uphold these ultra competitive, I would say maybe psychologically imbalanced individuals. And yet all around me, I was finding examples of other individuals doing that. So I wanted to showcase that for those individuals to let them know that they're not alone. And then also for anyone else that might resonate with one of those identities, that they're not alone and that they don't need to put so much pressure on themselves.
Oh, that's such beautiful advice. And so if people build these skills by your book, question beliefs, whatever it is they choose to do, what are some of the benefits they might expect?
Oh, you know, just like wellness is not a checklist, one and done. Spoiler alert: if you buy the book and you read it, all your problems won't be solved. But what I wanted to do with this book is just educate others and allow them to critically think. I think in terms of building your wellness muscle, building your intellectual muscle is very important. I have a background in education, a master's in education, and I've always felt like critical thinking, examining healthy debate will help us become better individuals to ourselves, help us become better caretakers, also become more empathetic and I think compassionate towards others. And so, what I hope this book does is allow you to question some of the things, some of the beliefs you might have had, allow you to look inside to see what you might be able to change within yourself. Small little actions you might be able to change in the people you interact with, whether that's your work environment, your personal environment, and then through collective action and finding those people around you that also believe or are experiencing the same problems as you, that's when we can create more movement and more shifts. And whether that's through businesses tipping the needle and forcing policy change, or policy change forcing businesses to act in the way that truly builds better wellness, that would be an incredible goal. I mentioned several times in the book, though, this won't happen in a day. Any lasting change takes a long time. It takes consistent investment of time, money, energy, also patience. And so during these times where I think a lot of people, especially in the United States, feel scared or really unstable, I try and bring a little bit of clarity to it's not your fault. And there are incredible people around you that believe in better things. And so if you start to question those beliefs and then have conversations with people around you that might question the same ones, that might in small ways bring us to a better future.
Oh, I love that. So where can people go if they want to learn more about you or your book?
Oh yeah. So you can find me on DaniBicknell.com, and there's a link to my book, The Restorative Rebel: Memoirs and Musings on Internalized Capitalism. I work as a consultant with organizations and founders, and on different initiatives to look at how we can bring cross-sector collaboration to kind of create more wellness in the workplace, wellness in our beneficiaries, wellness in both our shareholders and our stakeholders, and not just our shareholders alone. And then you can find the book wherever books are found online. So my favorite right now is bookshop.org, because a small portion goes to your local bookstore if of your choosing. But if you don't see it in your local bookstore, you can just use the title, and then the ISBN number is on my website as well. And so you can support it however you like, but it's through all of the online channels as well.
Well, thank you so much, Dani. As usual, it's wonderful chatting with you, and I hope we get to chat
Likewise.
again soon.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. Thanks so much for having me. This was great.
Talk to you later. If you're a coach, consultant, or other helping professional, you know how hard it is to grow your business while working in your business. That's why we created this free collection of science-based articles, social media posts, and other content resources that you can brand as your own and use to grow your business. This means you can publish these content resources on your website, give them away as lead magnets to collect more emails, or even use them in your paid programs. So if you want to grow your business quickly and easily, grab this free content collection.